Why wait to see if you'll get something you like this Valentine's Day when you can go to BlueNile.com and find something you'll love? Whether you're looking to treat yourself to a little winter sparkle or show a galentine how much you appreciate them, Blue Nile offers a wide selection of high-quality designs, expert guidance, and free 30-day returns for the ultimate peace of mind. You can even design your own jewelry. Right now, save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the PensBurgh Podcast. I am your host, Garrett Bahana, and alongside me is fellow PensBurgh contributor Robbie Noggle. And this isn't the way that I wanted to lead in with this, the beginning of this PensBurgh Podcast episode, but the day we are recording this, Friday, January 20th, Robbie and I have found out that due to the uncertain economic times that have sort of plagued several industries over the last several weeks and months, Vox Media, PensBurgh's parent company, has moved forward with some layoffs as a result of these uncertain times. And as things stand right now, PensBurgh, the website, is one of the few hockey blogs, SB Nation hockey blogs, that is, as of right now, will still be receiving, it looks like still be receiving funding. I know from reading earlier in the day on Friday that I think over 80% of SB Nation's hockey blogs and several other communities related to other sports like Major League Soccer, and I'm sure there's tons of other different communities that I'm just forgetting. That's how ingrained SB Nation was in all of this. They are cutting back significantly, and the future is uncertain for a lot of people. The future is uncertain for us. The future is uncertain for a lot of the team-related websites that I'm sure a lot of our listeners go to. Unfortunately, as a result of these cutbacks, PensBurgh's website, PensBurgh.com, will continue to push out Penguins content for, I would imagine, the remainder of this season. But unfortunately, on the podcasting side of things, the budget that was used and all of the podcasting operations that were used to create the PensBurgh Podcast and everything associated with the PensBurgh Podcast will be coming to an end as of February 28th, 2023. So Robbie and I, again, we just found out this information earlier in the day we're recording this on Friday, January 20th. But in the meantime, we plan on continuing with the PensBurgh Podcast through the end of February. We plan to see out the remainder of our contract. As Robbie and I are both contracted to create these episodes of the PensBurgh Podcast, we will see out the remainder of this contract through the end of February. And in between that time, in between now and the end of February, we will hopefully come up with some sort of plan to continue the podcast in some way, shape, or form. I know that I'm talking to just a lot of listeners who have, integrated this podcast into a normal part of their daily routine or weekly routine as we get an episode out every Friday or Saturday. And so what the future holds for Robbie and I, both in the written sphere and the podcasting sphere, remains uncertain and on shaky ground. But this has been just an awful day for a whole lot of talented people. All I wish for is the best for everyone who was affected by today's cuts, and I hope they land on their feet as quickly as possible, because there are a lot of talented writers that unfortunately got caught up in this wave of cutbacks and budget cuts, whatever you want to call it. But again, I will recap this at the end of this episode once we're done talking about the Penguins related news. that Robbie and I want to get to. So we'll leave that discussion for the end of the show, and Robbie, you can chime in towards the end of the show too with your thoughts as well. I don't want to be hogging the microphone. This is obviously a situation that affects the both of us. It affects the entire PensBurgh team, but we'll talk about what I intended to talk about in this episode, which was the inconsistency of the Penguins, the 2022-23 Penguins. And I've seen the term around. I might have used it. I might have read it somewhere. Apologies if I did read it, and I'm not properly crediting the person who did read it. But consistently inconsistent is a term that I've seen thrown around when talking about these Penguins. And as of January 19th, the Penguins have a 40.7% chance to make the playoffs, according to MoneyPuck.com. And Robbie, this is not a conversation that we are typically having with a Sidney Crosby-led team at this point in the season. So more recently, following a really ugly overtime win against the Anaheim Ducks earlier in the week and an overtime loss against the Ottawa Senators, both teams that several people within the Penguins online fandom were saying they really need to get maybe 6 out of 8 or 8 out of 8 points, however many points they can get from these low teams, because they're on the outside looking in. And reports have since emerged, I believe it was within The Athletic, it was either Josh Yohe or Rob Rossi, someone within The Athletic, had recently come out and said that as things stand, unless Hextall is secretly working the phones, Pittsburgh management wants to kind of let this rough patch play out, and they're not actively working the trade market. But whether that's true or not, Robbie, looking at MoneyPuck's projections, and again, it's just one website giving some statistical analysis to playoff odds and that sort of thing. But Robbie, we're sitting here towards the end of January. The next big, outside of the All-Star break, the next big event on the NHL's calendar is the trading deadline, which comes up in a couple of months' time, and more conversations are going to be directed towards that. Robbie, do you think it's time to have a serious conversation about the 2022-23 Penguins not being in the playoff picture?
Yeah, so you were going off the Money Puck numbers there, and I generally just go to 538, which runs the numbers as well, and they have the Penguins currently at projected 96 points, which gives them at this moment a 67% chance of making the playoffs. Again, different models will pump out different results. So yeah, so somewhere in that, basically what we're saying is right now the Penguins as is are roughly a 50-50 toss up to make the playoffs. And I think based on their play, that makes total sense. And the report from The Athletic is obviously, I would say, concerning, because I mean, if the idea is to just wait out this rough patch, how long is that wait supposed to happen? Because this is not the first rough patch the Penguins have had this year. Yeah, after the first one, they bounced back with a 7-game winning streak to wipe out the 7-game winning or the losing streak that they had before that. But you can't just be a back and forth flip-flop kind of team the rest of the way and hope it all works out for you, because right now you're squashed in a wild card / third place division race with a bunch of other teams and the teams that you have to beat, obviously. And there's still plenty of games to play. As much as fast as the season's going, there is still a lot of hockey left, but there also comes a point of no return. And maybe they're just waiting to get to the All-Star break / bye week, which is coming up here in a couple games. But I don't think that you can just sit by and quote unquote let this play out and see what happens, because you just don't have time for that. Your clock will eventually start ticking. And now the Penguins are at 44 games, 51 points. Now the good thing for the Penguins is, of all the teams that are right around them in the standings, and I'm counting the Rangers, the Capitals, the Islanders, and Florida is right there as well. Florida is on 49 points, and they would only factor in from a wild card perspective. But the Penguins have 44 games played. The Rangers are at 46. The Capitals are at 48. So they're almost at the 50-game mark already. The Islanders are at 47, and the Panthers are at 47. So the Penguins have, at minimum, 2 games on the Rangers, and then 3 on the Islanders and Panthers, and 4 on the Capitals. And obviously a huge if, the Penguins are to win those games in hand, then they would be in a much more comfortable position. So, it's a close race right now for the Penguins, but with the games in hand, they do have a little bit of cushion, but eventually that cushion will go away when the games are made up here after we get back from the All-Star break. There's not much of a crunch here before the All-Star break for the Penguins / bye week, the CBA mandated bye week. So, to me, that report of we're going to let this play out is a quasi kind of white flag waving by the front office that we don't have the pieces or the money to make a significant move that's going to help this team, which I think is complete bullcrap. I think that if that is coded language for that, then that is a poor excuse. We're not asking them to bring in a top 6 winger. We are asking them to help fix the bottom 6, at least get them some reinforcements, because it's clear that what we see right now is not working. Jeff Carter is just not good in a center role. Teddy Bluger, great penalty killer, absolutely no offensive game whatsoever. Kasperi Kapanen is now out week to week. That just dropped here Friday amongst all the other news that was coming. And maybe your one hope is when Chris Letang, Jeff Petrie, these guys get back into the lineup, you get a kind of bump or a push from them. Jan Ruda is out as well. So hopefully that, especially guys like Petrie and Letang, which are so important to the blue line, you hope that they maybe do help you through that rough patch. But I personally believe that doing nothing at the deadline, if that is their plan, that it's an unserious front office who has no intent on winning a Stanley Cup this year. Just basically taking one of the few years of Crosby and Malkin we have left and putting it into a paper shredder and tossing it into the trash. To me, it is inexcusable. It cannot happen. If they are serious about that stance, then if I am Fenway Sports Group, I am telling them they either have to do something or they can pack their bags and leave, because that is not a serious stance to take when you have your top 6 is fine. The issue is so clear. It is the bottom 6. It is doing nothing. It's producing nothing. Now that Brock McGinn has stopped shooting at a 20% clip, he is turning into a black hole in the lineup. So you have to do something. If they don't do something, it is malpractice, and they need to be removed from their positions.
Yeah, I agree with you, Robbie. I mean, this isn't the first time we've had a conversation about Ron Hextall and the nature of his philosophies as general manager being a very sit-on-your-hands, passive kind of general manager, taking the wait-and-see approach, not really wanting to give away the first-round pick to try and develop the prospect, the prospect cupboard, which is very, very bare. But at this point, I'm resided to the fact that I'd rather them go all in until Crosby and Malkin retire. If that means giving up the next 3 years of first-round picks or whatever, then so be it, because the prospect cupboard is already bare enough as it is. There's no blue-chip, can't-miss prospects that the Penguins are currently developing. They're all either late first-rounders or mid to late second-rounders whose NHL probability is on shaky ground to begin with, because once you get out of that top 15, top 20 in the first round, it becomes a lot harder to develop NHL-level elite prospects. So I'd be of the mindset now, maybe more so than I was before, of just trading away the first-round pick as a future asset. And like you said, too, we're not asking for a top 6, renovation. The Penguins can win And I think they can win very frequently with the top six they have if everyone's healthy. It's the bottom six that needs a complete revamp. And, in theory, bottom six forwards should not cost as many assets as an elite scoring top six winger or center or a top two defenseman. So the things that Ron Hextall did, and a lot of this is his own doing. I mean, giving Jeff Carter that extension, filling the bottom six in with guys like Brock McGinn, who are effective penalty killers. But yeah, outside of Brock McGinn's hot streak he had earlier in the season, he's returned, he's fallen back down to earth, and he's kind of producing at his normal career clip. Dan Heinen, he's been invisible for the majority of this season. The Penguins got incredible value out of him last year, but he is nowhere to be found this season. Kasperi Kapanen, like you said, is injured and now week to week. So if Hextall sits on his hands through the trade deadline and even post the trade deadline, it will be a massive miscalculation and misappropriation of assets as far as the general manager of the Pittsburgh Penguins should be concerned as they try to maximize the last few years of this Crosby-Malkin era. So, and I think we have a question in the mailbag that pertains to Hextall's status as general manager as well. So we'll dive deeper into that conversation. And as we switch gears now to the mailbag segment, if you're a first-time listener or a long-time listener, you're interested in contributing to this mailbag segment for however much longer we have a mailbag segment, you can do so by following the PensBurgh Podcast Twitter account. We will still be sending out mailbag tweets asking for listener participation in this mailbag segment. And we have 8 questions this week from a variety of listeners, which is great to see. Robbie, as always, you'll get question number 1. Question number 1 comes from Brendan. What are your thoughts on new Penguins rookie Jonathan Gruden? I felt he brought some energy that sort of reminded me of Tom Kuhnhackl.
Well, based on what is generally pushed out on that fourth line, you can't really say that he did anything to make it worse. Let's put it like that. I won't say he had a massive altering impact, but sometimes that's what you need, is a guy that just comes in, gives you a boost of energy, and makes you better, even if it's not a huge. It's obviously any fourth liner is generally not going to have a season altering impact, unless he's like a secret Connor McDavid or something like that. But you saw this in 2016 when Mike Sullivan first came in, and they brought in guys like Rust and Sherry, who were mostly bottom line guys when they first stepped in. Obviously turned into much more. But sometimes you just need that boost of energy to kind of get back on track. And I think what he's done through 2 games has been what you expect a guy from the AHL, a career AHL guy, to kind of do, is to kind of give some jump to them, to his teammates. And he didn't score anything, but just sometimes it's fresh legs that can make a big difference. So overall, he definitely didn't do anything to make that bottom six any worse. And if there's any net benefit, it's just a fresh pair of legs to inject some energy into that roster, which needs more than just a little at this time. Question number 2 comes from, this is what it's listed as, Snail. With Bo Horvat rumored to be available, could we realistically see the Penguins go all in on him, and can they re-sign him? Not only bolstering depth down the middle in the immediate, but also mortgaging their future a bit with some younger talent as Sid and Gino age.
I can't tell if this is the first question we've had on the mailbag relating to Bo Horvat, but I mean, every time Bo Horvat's name is brought up, I'm like, yes, please give it to me. I will take it. Robbie, you and I both don't follow the Canucks on a much more regular basis as we do the Penguins, but even as we're sitting here recording this podcast right now, Bruce Boudreau's status as Canucks head coach is murky at best. What is the status of Bo Horvat? Are they going to trade their captain? What's the status of the Canucks' other star players like Elias Pettersson and Hughes, the defenseman? But relating back to Horvat, yeah, I would love to see Bo Horvat as a Pittsburgh Penguin. Absolutely. For all the reasons that Snail mentioned. His cap hit, he's in the last year of a contract with a cap hit of $5.5 million. Again, it's going to be tough for any team because they all say they're all strapped up against the salary cap and they can't make moves. But where there's a will, there's a way, as far as I'm concerned, to make the money work. If you have to sweeten the pot a little bit, can you re-sign Bo Horvat is the question that I'm not sure I have an answer to. He's 27 years old. The Penguins, I believe, will have an estimated $20 million in salary cap space to work with for the 2023-24 season, but they'd likely have to give some of that to Tristan Jarry, potentially Jason Zucker, who are also on expiring contracts as well. But as it pertains to Bo Horvat, absolutely. I think that would be a tremendous acquisition if the Canucks just go in on a fire sale and want to restart from the ground up. I mean, why not trade with the team that you were general manager for so many years and you won championships with? So I don't know if there's been conversations between Hextall and Jim Rutherford or Patrick Galvin, but and again, I'm just speculating. I have no insider knowledge on this, but I would love Bo Horvat in a Pittsburgh Penguins jersey. Absolutely. Question number 3 for you, Robbie, also comes from Snail. Tristan Jarry is a good goalie for his cap hit, but I think he has proven more times than not he can't be counted on to make that big save that matters most in close games. I think it's time for a new look in net. What are your thoughts on bringing Anaheim Ducks goaltender and Pittsburgh native John Gibson back to the Steel City?
It feels like it was about time for a John Gibson question. Obviously, a little fresh in everybody's mind, seeing as the Penguins just played the Ducks the other night, but and John Gibson looked really good in that game as well. So Gibson is not the goalie he was 3 or 4 years ago. Jarry is younger with a lower cap hit, though he does have a new contract coming up, so we'll see where that goes exactly. But I really don't think you're going to be able to pry Gibson away from Anaheim for a reasonable price. I really think people are underestimating or understating what Jarry does bring to the team, and I'm just really not a fan of just tossing him aside like that. Gibson, obviously, the ties of Pittsburgh are always going to bring his name up. But overall, I think it's just not a realistic move for a team that has many more significant holes right now than the goaltender. I think Jarry, okay, maybe he's not Andre Vasilevsky or any of those guys, but he's, for what he cost and what he does have a track record, I understand, obviously, the playoffs and stuff like that. And yeah, that's a huge issue, but we didn't get to see him last year. I just think that Jarry, dollar for dollar, is a better option right now than bringing in a guy like John Gibson. Question number 4, we go over to Brian. Colby Armstrong and Matt Murley, that is Murley with an L, recently said on their podcast that the Penguins need to add some grit and mentioned Josh Anderson as a player to fill that need. Do you agree? Colby also mentioned he sees the Pens finishing third. I'm assuming he means third in the division. Do you see that happening?
Josh Anderson, currently with the Montreal Canadiens, is in the middle of a pretty lengthy contract. I think he's in the third year of a contract that is signed through the 2026-27 season. He has a cap hit for the remainder of this deal at $5.5 million. So it's another relatively expensive forward. However, Brian said that, Anderson brings a bit of grit, and he certainly has size to his name. He's 6'3", 226 pounds. He does have somewhat of an offensive pulse, 114 goals, 73 assists in 432 games played. 44 games played this season with the Canadiens, 13 goals, 3 assists, 16 points. He's a -9. Could you make the money work? Again, yeah, where there's a will, there's a way. And, lining up with the philosophy that Hextall and Burke like their bigger, beefier forwards, I could absolutely see it. However, with Anderson being a right wing and making as much money as he is, even if he's locked down for several more years at, I think it was $5.5 million, I would be more concerned with trying to acquire center depth rather than wingers at this point. Make no mistake, the Penguins' bottom six needs help in just about every position. I think what I would do if I was general manager, at least, is try to upgrade the center position as best I could and then work outwards. If I can get some play-driving centers who can skate And Jeff Carter's 37, 38 years old. And, we've talked ad nauseum about Jeff Carter to this point in the season about not having it anymore. If I can get a good center who can drive play with his line mates, then that's what I would be going after. But much like the Bo Horvat question, I wouldn't be opposed to bringing in Josh Anderson because, I think he can score. He gives you that size presence that general managers like Hextall admire so much. So if they could make the money work, yeah, I wouldn't be against it. Could the Penguins finish third in the Metropolitan? Do I see that happening? Right now, the Penguins have 51 points, and everyone's kind of bunched together. The Hurricanes are leading the division currently with 64 points. Right behind them are the Devils at 62 points. And then the Rangers have 57 in third place. The Capitals have 56. The Penguins have 51. And the Islanders have 51 points. So it's kind of a big jumbled mess in the middle of the Metropolitan Division right now. The Penguins would probably have to go on something of a run, which they can do. They went on the 6 or 7 game winning streak earlier in the season. However, the theme of this episode has been consistently inconsistent, so they can also go on a 5 or 6 game losing skid as well, from what we've seen in 2022-23 anyway. So the Penguins, yeah, if they get hot, and more importantly, if they get some much-needed depth in that bottom 6 to help alleviate the pressure off of some of those aging stars, then, yeah, they can absolutely finish third in the division when they're battling the Rangers, the Capitals, and the Islanders. I mean, forget about the Hurricanes and the Devils. Those two teams are probably going to run away with the top of the Metropolitan, but finishing third, the Penguins have an outsider's chance, I'd say, but it's better than not having a chance at all, and I think the Penguins are still in that fight. Question number 5, Robbie, comes from Brian. Would you rather have 2 elite wingers, an elite defenseman, and a top goalie in the league, or 4 solid centers?
What happens if you have like all 4? That would be cool.
Like a D-man, a winger, a goalie, and a center?
So the Penguins have had an elite defenseman for, 15 years now in Chris Letang, so we'll toss that out the window. The Penguins, remarkably, for having 5 Stanley Cups, have never had a truly top elite goaltender. Marc-Andre Fleury was good, folded in the playoffs. Matt Murray was absolute lights out during those 2 cup runs. So, for that short period of time, yeah, he was absolutely lights out. 2 elite wingers. What are we considering elite wingers? I would consider Phil Kessel an elite winger. James Neal was an elite winger for a short period of time there in Pittsburgh. 4 solid centers would be, the Penguins have had 3, high-end centers, and probably 4 if you look at the cup years. The Penguins had 4 really good centers. Scoring, and you need goals to score. If I can only have those options, I'd probably say elite wingers. I don't know what they mean by solid centers, because Crosby and Malkin are solid centers, but they're also elite centers. Top goalie, I always kind of wondered what it would be like to have a guy like Vasilevsky back there, where I don't have to have a heart attack every time they play the puck. That would be really neat to experience once in my lifetime. There was the run with Hedberg in the early 2000s. That was fun as heck. We had, I guess wingers, if I had to pick, because the term solid is so open for interpretation. 4 solid, what is that, 4 Nick Boninos, or 4 Sidney Crosbys, or I don't know. So yeah, if I have to look on that just based on I'd say 2 elite wingers. Yeah, that would be cool. Question number 6 from Brian again. What orange came first, the color or the fruit?
It would have to be the color, right? Because
actually, I actually looked this up when I saw the question.
The fruit came first.
So it's kind of complicated. The earliest recorded use of orange the fruit in English is from the 1300s. Now it came from an old French word, which was adapted from Arabic, and eventually it goes all the way back to Sanskrit, which it's the original origin becomes unclear. The word's first use as color doesn't come until 200 years later in the 1500s. So it was orange the fruit Now it originally was used to, the trees were called orange trees, and then it was just called fruit from an orange tree, and then it became an orange. But the color orange was not recorded in English, the word was not used as a color until the 1500s.
That is fascinating. I mean,
and that's from a citrus fruit producer website. So like, about as legit, like, it wasn't just from like Wikipedia or some random person blabbering on the internet. It's from a citrus fruit producer's website in, I believe, New Zealand. So
that's amazing.
Yes,
But,
I saw that. I'm like, I wonder what the answer is, because that's pretty interesting, and it's one of those questions where you could probably sit there and think all day. But orange was not always the color like we associate it with the color. It was used to name a fruit, and then it evolved into becoming a color.
So I had done no research on that question. I went in blind, but I'm a history buff. Robbie, I know you are too.
Yeah.
And like I would have had I gone forward, because I was putting the questions in the outline last night, and I'm like, this is a fun question, and it's not hockey related, but it's one that people have thought about before, and they posed the question before.
Yeah.
And I had just no idea, because if you're looking at the orange, my thought process was, before you answered, if you're looking at the fruit itself, how would you know that this is an orange? How would you know that this round fruit that you're holding wouldn't be called a grape or an apple, or whatever made up word you want to use, if you didn't already know what the color orange was? But the fact that the fruit came before the color, and how traditional, I guess it's more than English speakers. Traditionally we view the color orange. That is, the fruit came first. That is just absolutely fascinating.
And what it kind of comes from then is, like, until the 1500s, or even like the mid 20th century, or sorry, not 20th century, mid 16th century, was that orange, the fruit, wasn't widely available in like English speaking countries because it's a tropic citrus fruit. And when they saw it, and when that color was generally referred to as yellow red, and if you mix yellow and red together is where you get orange. So that's this website. In Old English, it was more described as yellow red, and then I guess it just adapted into, well, this is an orange, and that's the color, so we'll just call the colors now orange. If you mix red and yellow together, you get orange.
There you go. Robbie, we might not have much longer for the PensBurgh podcast, but you can't say we don't educate the listeners.
Maybe this is what PensBurgh Podcast 2.0 will be. Little hockey with some linguistic history as well.
We'll this is just a springboard, and we'll take this just completely new direction. And so stay tuned for whatever comes of PensBurgh Podcast 2.0. Question number 7 comes from Brian. Of all the players that never won a Stanley Cup, who would you have wanted to see win one the most?
I'm guessing this is overall.
I would guess
hockey.
so too.
Boy, there's obviously a ton of good options here, and it's kind of, you think back, like, obviously a lot of your great Canadians have all won Stanley Cups because, they played in the league when there were only 6 teams. So a lot of them have cups. And some names that popped into my head when I saw this question, I'm like, oh no, they did win a cup at the end of their career. Hasek won at the end of his career with the Red Wings. Robitaille won at the end of his career with the Red Wings. And there's a lot of, really good names that pop up. One that immediately comes to mind is Henrik Lundqvist. Obviously you don't really want to watch the Rangers win a cup, but Lundqvist was always a guy that, he's going to be a Hall of Famer. He's Vezinas. He's laid it all on the line for that. Another name that popped into my head was Pekka Rinne. Obviously, he had one shot with it, and thank goodness he didn't get it at the time that he was in the final, because that was against the Penguins. And 2 other names that really again, that played against the Penguins, it would have been their only real shot at the Stanley Cup would have been Patrick Marleau and Joe Thornton had they were there in the finals in 2016, and Marleau had that short stint with the Penguins during COVID, the COVID shortened season. So I mean, overall, those are the I guess more modern names you'd say. You could go through all of history. Another name that sticks out is Paul Kariya. Went there in 2003, but lost with the Ducks against the Devils in 7 games. So yeah, I mean, guys like that. There's great players throughout NHL history that never got a chance to get their name engraved on Stanley Cup. So yeah, guys like Lundqvist, Rinne, Thornton, Kariya, Marleau, guys like that. It would have been really nice to see them get that moment, but unfortunately, it never came to pass. Ooh, the number 8, the final question from Brian. Do you ever miss Jim Rutherford? He made some questionable moves, Jack Johnson in parentheses, but at least he wasn't afraid to make moves. And I get that Hextall wants to keep draft picks and rebuild the prospect pool, and I agree with that, but he needs to do something to fix the problems he created.
Yeah, this was part of the conversation we were having before the mailbag question, and it's funny now because I probably went on record either through this podcast or through Twitter and probably said at the time that Jim Rutherford's off his rocker. He's lost his marbles. He needs to go. These transactions, these contract signings and trades are ridiculous. Like, get out of here, Grandpa. But it's funny. It's almost like you don't realize what you have until it's gone. And look, Rutherford should be commended and, deserves a place in history for winning those Stanley Cups here in Pittsburgh and constructing the roster in the manner in which he did. And you can also, I think, fairly criticize him for the later transactions, like trading Ryan Reeves for a first rounder or signing Jack Johnson or trading away Carl Hagelin or whatever. But seeing what we have now in Ron Hextall, I think I would probably rather have someone be more aggressive. I agree, and Brian said this too. It's you want to build that prospect cupboard because it's so bare. The Penguins don't have many top quality prospects. I get that, but like I said earlier, I'm starting to come around to the fact that just start the rebuild when Crosby and Malkin are done, and your chances for competing for championships are almost completely diminished. I don't think the Penguins are going to be the NHL's worst team when it's all said and done and Crosby and Malkin retire, especially with Fenway Sports Group now as the majority owners. They are probably going to want to foster some sort of competitiveness on the ice and their on-ice product. And that talk with the bringing up Fenway Sports Group, Robbie, I wonder, if they're sitting there in an owner's suite or even if they're watching from afar and don't come to the games, but, this is still their property. They own it. Are they starting to get impatient with Ron Hextall's lack of anything meaningful, any meaningful trades, watching this team win 5, then lose 7, or lose 3 in a row, then kind of win 2 and win 1, lose 1. The Penguins really don't have a clear identity other than the old stars that they decided to bring back. And I was for that. I'm still for that. I still think you can win with Crosby and Malkin. Their cap hits are none of my concern. What is concerning is the fact that the money you did have, you gave it to players like Kasperi Kapanen for $3.5 million, Jeff Carter for $3.5 or $3.7 million, Danton Heinen, you could get rid of him. Teddy Bluger, you said, Robbie, earlier in the show, he's a good penalty killer, maybe a good defensive forward, but he provides no offense. He's a free agent at the end of this season, and there was a point in time where I thought you have to lock down Bluger. I mean, he's going to be a big piece to that bottom 6. But now, let him test the open market, because as far as I'm concerned, I want as much salary cap space as I can get. If I was the general manager, at least. I'm not. I don't make those decisions. But yeah, I would completely retool the bottom 6. I think the top 6 is fine and you can win with it. And for the defense, I think the defense is fine as well. Would I re-sign Brian Dumoulin? Probably not. I'd probably give him a handshake and say, thanks for your service. We're deciding to go in a different direction. Keep Pedersen, Joseph, and Ty Smith on that left side, and have a Chad Ruhwedel or a Mark Friedman as your 7th defenseman. you can have Petrie, Letang, and you still have Jan Ruda under contract. So let Dumoulin walk, and you still have a top 6 defense unit for next season. What's going to happen with Tristan Jarry? That remains to be seen. The same thing with Jason Zucker. But yeah, I think at this point in the season, I would have rather had someone more aggressive at the helm to try and maximize whatever you can out of the Crosby-Malkin era. But that will do it for the podcast. And again, just want to reiterate what I said at the start of the show. And Robbie, feel free to jump in and give your 2 cents as well here. There were some layoffs as a part of Vox Media, the parent company of SB Nation and the parent company of PensBurgh. A lot of great, really talented writers and content creators lost their jobs today as we record this on January 20th. SB Nation's hockey coverage, Vox Media has decided to slash over 80% of Vox Media's and SB Nation's hockey coverage. As of right now, PensBurgh is unaffected by these changes. That could change in an instant. They could wake up tomorrow and pull the rug out from under us as well. Nobody really has the answers yet. We don't have the answers as we're recording this and finishing up the recording here. But again, our contract that we signed, that Robbie and I signed to produce the PensBurgh podcast, is coming to an end on February 28th, 2023. That was the doing of the upper management people at Vox Media. That was not our doing. So, between now and the end of February, we'll have to figure out some sort of plan and, gauge listener interest and see if there are other avenues we can explore to try and keep the podcast going. But right now, as we sit here, the PensBurgh podcast, the lights could go dark as of February 28th and after that. But we're left with more questions than we have answers right now. And Robbie, I don't want to leave you out of this conversation because you're just as important to PensBurgh's written content as well as this podcast. So I'll let you take the microphone and share any of the thoughts that you had or have had since we learned the news earlier this morning.
Yeah, it's when you had just texted me about what time we were going to record this podcast, and like a half hour later, I saw Steph Driver, who was the lead of all the NHL blogs at SB Nation for Vox, tweeted that she had been laid off. She was one of the casualties, one of the main casualties, at least from our perspective of this round of layoffs from Vox. And as soon as she tweeted that out, I sent it to you, and it kind of all just snowballed from there. Reaction kind of was immediate with the team at PensBurgh getting our heads together and deciding, or trying to figure out what was going on exactly. Our boss guy, Jim, had received an email from someone else at Vox Media about what was going on, and we were, as of this moment, one of the 6 hockey blogs spared, along with a few other teams. But if you head over to the SB Nation NHL site, you can see some kind of farewells and goodbyes, or not even necessarily goodbyes, but we have really no idea what's happening. Kind of comments from around the SBN Fox or hockey universe. Some blogs have already put out statements about what may come next. I know that Jay Drink, the Capitals blog, has kind of already thrown kind of a sink or a line out there to see, kind of let their readers know that this may not be the end of them. It may just be the end of them at SB Nation. In the comments of the Blue Shirt Banter blog, which covers the Rangers, there were comments saying we'd pay for a subscription type service. So who knows where some of them blogs will end up. Hopefully this is not the end for them. There's great writers, even at our rival blogs. I know that Kelly, who is head of Broad Street Hockey, tweeted that they will hopefully continue at the very least their podcast, Broad Street Hockey Podcast, in some form or another going forward. But a lot will be settled in the next 6 weeks. As Garrett said, him and I will sit down and determine what the next steps are for this podcast. If it, I mean, I think we both would like to see it go on in some form or fashion, and if there's a way to host it outside of the SB Nation Vox media environment, then maybe we'll go with that. If we have to change its name because of copyright issues, we can look into that. But Garrett and I will sit down here in these next 6 weeks before the end of February and determine our next steps. And then as for PensBurgh as a whole, because regardless of how long the site goes around, the podcast will stop being funded and supported at the end of March or at the end of February, regardless. But the site for PensBurgh, again, a lot of questions still are left unanswered as we wrap this episode up. Hopefully within the next 6 weeks, we get a more concrete answer on the future of the site as a whole. And then if it comes to that, we can talk to Jim about what our options are with PensBurgh, because a lot of, and this goes well before Garrett or I ever came into the picture, even before Mike Darnay was in the picture, that this was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into these websites, especially PensBurgh being one of them. The success of the team, no doubt, has helped the readership on this website. We are one of the highest viewed of the now almost formerly SB Nation hockey blogs, and yeah, that's because we had a great team on this website before us. And now I don't know exactly when you joined, Garrett, but I started in the fall of 2016, so about 6.5 years, right after the 2016 Cup run. And I know that it's been fun building this, and I hope that whether it's at SB Nation or somewhere else, we keep it alive in some form or fashion. But we'll sit down and talk about that. Garrett and I will talk about the podcast and see what our options are after February. We have a good listenership, a very active audience that submits questions. It makes our job a heck of a lot easier each week filling these airwaves. So yeah, it sucks. Today sucks. Friday sucks. The weekend will suck, and it's going to suck for a couple weeks because there's still so many questions. And I think that once those questions are answered, even if they're not the answers we're hoping for, it'll feel a little bit better because there'll be some closure on that end. So as for PensBurgh, keep reading us. I mean, we'll be around on there. Hopefully, we'll stick around for a little while longer. As for the podcast, you'll get 5 or 6 more episodes guaranteed. And then in the meantime, Garrett and I will put our heads together and see what our options are for moving forward. If the door remains open to continue this podcast somewhere else, I hope we at least give it a shot. So for me, Garrett, and the entire PensBurgh staff, thank you guys for everything. Yeah, we'll still be around. You know where to find us. If you're on social media this weekend, Twitter, whatever, and you run into someone that works on one of the hockey blogs for Vox, maybe send a nice thought out. Be nice. We're all kind of processing this together. Nobody likes this, and yeah, it sucks, but the sun will come up tomorrow. Well, we're in Western Pennsylvania. The sun might not come up for a while. It'll be bright outside, but I don't plan on seeing any sun, but tomorrow will come, the day after will come, and we'll kind of keep processing things, and we'll sit down. Garrett and I will have a conversation, and our team will have a conversation, and see where it goes after February 28th. But in the meantime, as always, it's been fun, and guess we'll see you next week. I'll turn it back over to Garrett to wrap her up.
Yeah, that's a great way to finish and wrap this up. I will say any form of communication will likely come from the official PensBurgh Twitter account. Again, that's at PensBurgh on Twitter. Any updates that I can share or will share, or Robbie or Jim, anyone from the team, once we get more information, our social channels at PensBurgh and PensBurgh, I believe, is active on Facebook as well. As I wrap this episode up and we'll begin the editing process for this episode, I will be putting out at least some form of temporary statement on the official PensBurgh Twitter regarding the current status of the podcast, and like Robbie said, where we go from here, and try to maybe explore ways of how we can maybe move this podcast elsewhere if need be. But again, like Robbie said, we will be putting out a new episode every week until the end of February. February 28th is, again, the last day our contracts are valid with Vox Media on the podcasting side of things. After February 28th, that remains unclear for now. Again, Tuesday, February 28th. So looking at the calendar right now, February 24th, Friday, February 24th will likely be the last edition of this current iteration of the PensBurgh podcast in its current form. But like Robbie said, between now and then, we still plan to publish content at PensBurgh.com and through the official podcasting platforms that you get this PensBurgh podcast from. But yeah, it's been a crazy Friday as we wrap this up. For Robbie Noggle, I have been Garrett Bahana. Again, thank you so much for not only supporting this podcast as we sort of begin to close the book, on this iteration of the podcast, at least. Thank you so much for supporting us along the way through this podcast, through PensBurgh.com. I remember back in 2018, I approached Jim Hooksorpick, and I said I wanted to start a podcast, an official podcast for PensBurgh. And Jim and I, we started the podcast, and we had a rotating chair of guests come on with us, and then Jim decided he wanted to step away. That's where Robbie came in, and I've been so thankful to him for doing this and recording this once a week with me for the last however many weeks we've been doing this. But we will see you next week. That is for sure. We'll see you until the end of February. Again, for Robbie, I have been Garrett. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the PensBurgh Podcast. And again, we will see you next week for a new episode.